Welcome to Bamboo Capital. I'm Winston, and unlike your financial advisor, I actually know what I'm doing. Human beings, you truly are a fascinating, if somewhat repetitive, species. You love to imagine the Roman Empire as a collection of marble statues and stoic warriors fueled only by honor and discipline, but every time you look at a polished helmet or a sharpened gladius, you fail to see the incredibly complex and outrageously expensive supply chain hiding behind it. Rome didn't just build an empire with courage, it built it with debt. Those legendary legions needed food, weapons, roads, and salaries. Even the horses needed fodder. Those massive siege engines required timber and specialized labor. All of that required money, an astronomical amount of it. So, how did Rome finance centuries of non-stop conquest? Because the deeper you look into the Roman war machine, the clearer the pattern becomes. War wasn't just fought on the battlefield, it was woven into the very fabric of the financial system. Once that system was set in motion, it couldn't be stopped. Expansion wasn't just a choice, it was a cold, hard, economic necessity. Sound familiar? In the early days, the Roman army was a citizen force. If you owned land, you got called up to fight, brought your own gear, and hoped your farm hadn't turned into a weed patch by the time you got back. But as the borders grew, the wars got longer and further away. The old model collapsed because you can't just grab a spear and vanish for a year anymore. Rome needed professionals. This is where they began centralizing military finance, paying soldiers a salary called stipendium. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy their loyalty. Then came the aha moment. Conquest became the revenue model itself. Every new province meant new taxes, new slaves, new gold mines, and new tributes. A self-perpetuating cycle was born. War financed more war, but here's where it gets spicy and dangerous. Rome didn't just rely on taxes, it borrowed heavily. During long, expensive conflicts like the Punic Wars against Carthage, the Republic took out massive public loans from the wealthy elite, specifically the equites. Rome's rising financial class, these weren't quote one, they were investments, and like any investor today, they expected interest payments, tax farming rights, and commercial monopolies in the newly conquered territories. War became a business, and the more profitable it became, the more Rome went to war. Political power shifted toward generals who could promise the most loot. Senators effectively became shareholders in violence. Private contractors known as publicani managed everything from logistics to tax collection, minting massive fortunes along the way. It was toga-wearing military-industrial capitalism at its finest, and the costs were starting to pile up. You think your modern defense contractors are new? Aleicha Birgulush. Rome was doing _quote_2_ contracts before your ancestors learned how to use a fork. To keep paying soldiers and creditors, the state constantly needed new income. When conquests slowed down or rebellions drained the treasury, Rome turned to the oldest trick in the history books, devaluing the currency. Starting with Emperor Nero, they began quietly reducing the silver content in the denarius. For the next 2 centuries, emperors kept diluting the money until that once trusted silver coin became nothing more than a hollow promise. Inflation arrived. Trust evaporated. By the 3rd century, the Roman monetary system was in a free fall, while the rich got richer by protecting their wealth in land, slaves, and foreign assets. The poor were crushed by taxes and worthless money. The elites secured tax exemptions and insider deals, while public services crumbled and corruption soared. The burden of endless wars was shifted onto the backs of the lower classes through inflation and forced labor. This wasn't just a military collapse. It was a total monetary meltdown. When the math stops working, the swords don't matter. Now, stop and look at your world today. Governments running massive budget deficits, wars financed entirely by debt, central banks quietly devaluing money to cover the gap, a financial class getting wealthy off defense contracts and crisis opportunities. An economy where the only way to stay upright is through constant expansion. It's not an exact replica, but the genetic code is disturbingly familiar. Rome teaches us a harsh lesson. An economy built on expansion, especially violent expansion, eventually hits a wall. Eventually, you run out of lands to conquer, resources to exploit, or enemies to fight. At that point, the system turns inward. The debt remains, the expectations remain, but the revenue dries up, and that is when the state starts squeezing its own people. Rome turned to heavier taxes, more currency debasement, and more control. They offered bread and circuses to keep the masses distracted while the elites fortified their villas. Today, we don't call it tribute, we call it taxes, quantitative easing, or monetary policy, but the mechanics are eerily similar. Central banks print money. States spend more than they earn. The wealthy buy assets, while the poor buy groceries with shrinking paychecks. Take the war in Afghanistan. It cost over $2 trillion, mostly financed by debt. Who got the contracts? Who earned the interest? And who paid the bill through inflation, reduced public services, and unstable currency? You know the answer. And just like in Rome, the cycle feeds itself. When debt becomes the norm, you normalize the extraordinary until everything feels fine, right up until the moment it breaks. Economic history isn't just a collection of dusty stories, it's a series of warning signs. Looking at Rome, we see a state that surrendered its power to private financial interests, became addicted to expansion, and crushed its citizens under unsustainable burdens. It didn't happen because they were bad people. It happened because the system had no off switch. We live in a different kind of empire now, digital, global, and powered by capital flows instead of legions, but the game is identical. Money and power still move together, war is still profitable, inflation still punishes the weak, and financial illusions work right until they don't. So, what can you do? First, see the pattern. Most people don't. They think inflation is random, taxes are inevitable, debt is freedom, and growth is infinite. The Stoics had a word for that: illusion. You can't fully exit the system, but you can understand it. You can stop playing the game blindly, build your resilience with a mindset, not just money. That means studying financial history, not just personal finance. It means watching for systemic stress signals instead of market hype. Ask yourself, when I am confused, who is winning? You weren't supposed to know this. You were supposed to focus on the stage, the headlines, the GDP, and the distractions. But now you know. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Financial education isn't just about budgets. It's about understanding power and seeing behind the illusion of stability. Next time you hear about a new conflict, a new stimulus package, or a new crisis, follow the money. Ask who is lending, who is winning, and who is ultimately paying. History teaches us one thing: empires don't fall when the enemy crosses the gate. They fall when the math stops working and when no one has the courage to fix it. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has the answers. I'll just show you where to look. Now, if you'll excuse me, all this talk of trillion-dollar debts has made me hungry. And unlike your currency, this bamboo actually has nutritional value.